I was raised in a family that was very chaotic. My mother liked alcoholics, and she married 3 of them. She was excommunicated from the Catholic Church because of her divorces. So to me, God was always a punishing God. She would say, you know, God's going to get you. God sees you. From what she told me, God was mean and it was going to hurt. So growing up in that household, I'm the youngest of 10 children. I've never met my real father. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room today. You kind of associate with other kids and you're like, well, they have fathers, where's mine? You know, and the fathers that were in my house were stepfathers, and they were very abusive. So I learned at a very early age I couldn't trust adults. When I was about 13 years old, I had already had a mindset that I wanted to get as far away from that household as I possibly could. So I did well in school, very athletic. I ended up getting a basketball scholarship out of state. And at 17, I never drank. I hated alcohol. I hated all of it. And it was an exchange student actually from Norway. And she introduced me to alcohol. She's like, let's get beer. And I said, nah, I'm not really. And you know, it just turned out we got a 6-pack of beer, and her and I opened them at the same time. And I'll never forget that night, because she got to drink the 1 beer, I drank the other 5. Alcohol produced something in me that I didn't. What it did was made me not care. It buried that fear that I was walking through life with, that I was never good enough. My own mother didn't love me. I didn't have a father that cared about me. So I started using alcohol to fill the void of the pain that was inside of me. You know, luckily it didn't interfere with me graduating college. I came back to Harford County. I was in a relationship with a young man that was an electrician. So I went and became a laborer helper at a local electrical contracting company. I got pregnant with my daughter at 22, right after I got back. It wasn't long after I started my electrical career. I had my daughter, again, single mom, repeating history. So I spent my 20s and my early 30s building a business, and at 27 I started my own company. I bought my first house, and I thought I was doing all the right things, but in the evenings and weekends I was doing nothing but feeding a hole in my soul that I didn't know how to fill, and I pursued that to the depths of insanity. When my daughter was about 13 years old, I ended up living homeless on the streets. I allowed that addiction to make decisions for me and take things away from me. I lost my home, I lost my business, I lost my daughter, I lost everything that was important. I was 39 years old when I lost my freedom. And I'm grateful every single day that God intervened and put me in a place where I could not get alcohol or drugs. You know, I look back at that time in my life and I realize I was in a prison most of my life, from childhood on. I lived in a prison in my head, full of fear, full of anger, full of resentments, and not knowing what to do with any of that. So I get out and I end up in Alcoholics Anonymous. It took me a long time to find work, but I'm driving to work one morning and there was this old beat up white van with a sticker on its bumper. And I don't like bumper stickers, I just hate them. But I remember looking at this thing going, well, what does that mean? And it was said Romans 8:31. And so, you know, I whip out my phone, it's 2014, I guess. And I pull out my phone and I'm like, what is Romans 8:31? What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And something inside me shifted. And I was like, yeah, if God's for me, who can be against me? I didn't understand what that meant, but I knew I liked it. It just touched something in my heart. So I get to work and I'm all excited, and I even printed something out. God's for you, who can be against you? I hung it at my desk, you know, like, look at that. And my boss comes back and I was like, oh, you're never gonna believe I saw this bumper sticker, and you know, it's got the sunset and the pretty font, and it's like, look what I did. And he said, Bethany, why don't you read the rest of Romans? And I was like, oh, okay. So now I got to do homework. So I get home that night, and I read the rest of Romans. And there was a line in Romans as well, 8:15. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. And at that moment, I knew I had a father. I knew I had a father that had protected me from the time I was a child to that particular moment. And this guy was one of the original members of Crossroads Community Church. And he was like, why don't you go to Crossroads? They meet at Sea Mountain Right, which happened to be like a mile from my house. You know, I showed up there and I'm sitting in the back by the doors in case I got to run out, waiting for God to throw lightning bolts, you know, because boy, what am I doing in a church, right? And I heard Bob preach, Pastor Bob. He was reading right out of the Bible and he was explaining it in a language I could understand. But the whole time I'm still full of fear because I'm looking at all these people that are there and they're all happily married with, you know, and they look put together and, you know, and I'm still trying to get my life together. I'm still trying to navigate all this. And I walked in to my boss's office one day and I said, what do you have that I don't have? And he said, I have Jesus Christ. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, you need to talk to Pastor Bob. And so I came in, I talked to Bob, and I talked to Jenny, and October of 2015, I was baptized. You know, like I said earlier, I come from I have 9 brothers and sisters, and my mom was still alive at that time, and I was so excited. I'm telling everybody, and not one of them came. And I realized I was adopted into the church that day, and you folks became my family. And you gave me peace, and you gave me a place to come and feel safe. And I'm still very, very active in Alcoholics Anonymous because I believe that God put me there so I could carry a message of hope. You know, I'm of service today, and that to me is the most beautiful thing in the world. Like, God gave me that. God gave me a purpose. And that daughter that I lost custody of, and she was 17 years old having to talk to her mother behind 4 inches of glass. You know, she tells people I'm her hero now. And I'm a grandmother, and I get to be present, and I get to be a power of example. And that's only through God's grace. You know, Bob talks about grace and mercy. And I love that because, you know, mercy, I did not get what I deserved by God's grace. And that to me is what letting go and overcoming is all about. So thanks for letting me tell my story. I do appreciate it.